to any of the questions or comments posed, and we'll start on this end and continue down.
Well, thank you. Sorry, I will just refer to possible future work in the context of the TRIPS Council. As it was suggested by Ambassador Patriota, maybe it will be useful to discuss in a future session particular aspects of the report, including flexibilities which are mentioned in one table of the report. The patentary standards, for instance, is an issue that we need to be discussing in depth. There are major problems in many countries where a large number of patents are granted, which are used just strategically in order to prevent generic competition, and this problem can be solved. It will not, as I mentioned before, require even a change in the law, but in the way in which practices are developed by the patent offices. Certainly the issue of compulsory license, and as it was mentioned, to avoid this idea that every country that grants a compulsory license is subject to threats or retaliation. It will be very important to clarify that in the context of the TRIPS Council, as well as other issues such as transparency. So I think there is a very important agenda to be pursued, and I hope that members of the WTO will agree on such an agenda and be able to discuss more in depth the recommendation.
Well, I feel obliged to answer to 3 questions and not to make conclusive remarks. One question was on the position of the high-level panel on PDPs, and I am a little bit surprised that you think that we were skeptic. We had some skepticism about their use, their utility. It's not the case. I mean, we know exactly that the NDI, other PDPs have really alimented the pipeline of new medicine and brought also to the market some of them that are of need and were not developed by the pharmaceutical industry alone. Our skepticism is only on the sustainability of such model. I mean, they depend mainly from finances coming from philanthropy and some public finances which we know now that they are not so solid as they should say. So our doubts, and it was brought also by people among us who had experience and were very proud about what some PDPs made, about the sustainability, the possibility really to be a stable mechanism for innovation. This is the reason of some perhaps undertone you found in our report. Now, on the consensus is clear. As I told before, the consensus is that it is a global problem and not a problem of only of the poor countries, that it is a challenge against rationing from medicine and health services, even in countries who had universal coverage until now. And the consensus is that the IP system is not able to answer and to address all the needs, and that some of these needs, at least, must be solved by other mechanisms than the intellectual property. And the last point of the consensus is that it is urgent to act, and we agreed on that without a doubt. Now, the remark of Peter Bayer about what WHO is making in the field of transparency is important. I would like to add that what is also very important is transparency about patents. And this is, I think, the task that another international agency should do, and that is the World International Intellectual Property Organization, WIPO, because, as you know, some medicine have hundreds of patents. And if you want to have early access for generica to the market, you have to help really this generica to know exactly what is the situation of the protection for the production of new medicines. So I think the call for transparency is on national level, on international level, in different agencies where WTO, WHO, and the WIPO are really challenged to bring their contribution.
Yes, thank you, Joe. Just briefly, maybe to underline what Philippe Dineton has already said, speaking on behalf of UNITAID, and this may be important specifically to clarify some points, like one that was mentioned here. We know there is some controversy about the paragraph 6 and the agreement that was, the protocol that was recently. I personally think it was an important step forward, but I do agree also that there are doubts, maybe doubts about that there may be cumbersome obstacles and so on. And I think one area might be, I mean, I cannot speak for, because, you know, it's a very transparent process and depends on the calls for, depends on the proposals which are presented, but one of them would be how you can make it really compatible, the protocol that was recently ratified with our objectives, because let me just remind UNITAID, I don't know if it's the only organization, but it's one of the few organizations that has in its constitutions something about intellectual property. It says where intellectual property and health, where intellectual property barriers hamper competition and prices and price reductions, UNITAID will support the use of by countries of compulsory licensing or other flexibilities under the framework of the Doha Declaration on Trade-Related blah, 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 blah. So this is a very unique aspect of our constitution, which was, by the way, reiterated when we approved this call for proposals. So I think it would be interesting to do not only this, I mentioned this as one example, but there may be other examples, things that were not talked about here. I mean, how you obtain cooperation between several countries to increase the size of the market, for instance, because sometimes even for a generic good, you may not have markets which are big enough. Exchange of experiences of countries that have tried. So all these things are things that would not fall outside the scope of the call for proposals, but I don't know exactly technically how they would fit precisely. But so in any case, these are suggestions. I would have other points to mention, but I think leave it there.
Thank you very much. Ambassador Dioudé?
I think I'll follow the example of Minister Amorim, and also because of time constraints, I'll make no additional comments. Just thank South Center for this opportunity of discussing this important topic. Thank you.
Ambassador Hassan.
On the contrary, I'll just make an additional point, and then of course thank the South Center. First of all, it is additional to what Minister Amorim said, and it is not a very major point, but I think when we were assisting at the entry into force of this TRIPS agreement, paragraph 6, I think the major point that almost all speakers tried to make is that there was legal uncertainty, and now we know where we're going. So legal certainty. Now, what is it that we call legal certainty? I think it will never be clear unless we see a case. So we have to wait till a case of compulsory licensing comes in front of us and we see what it generates. Does it generate a smooth selling, or it doesn't generate a smooth selling? There are prickly issues here. And I think that is the real test of what we are into. But I think it must be said that this is a step forward, no doubt about it. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you very much for the opportunity given to us to be on this August 20.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Hassan. Given the late hour, allow me to just provide 3 overarching conclusions that I have drawn from the conclusions as a way of wrapping up. And the first is that the opportunity to have a substantive discussion on the recommendations actually contained in the report was warmly welcomed, and I sense a real hunger for that. So thank you to the panel and to the audience for making that possible. I wanted to congratulate WTO for being perhaps the leader of the pack of the trilateral collaboration between the three agencies, also with WIPO and WHO, and WTO has really led the way in allowing for this substantive discussion to happen, and of course there will be others that will follow. The second is that certainly it's very clear there are a number of recommendations specifically for WTO, for trade negotiators also working on bilateral or regional agreements. And I think one of the key points I would take away from this panel discussion is that those negotiations and of course the implementation of agreements is political. It's not only about legal certainty, but in fact about policy space or about political certainty. And one of the key recommendations of the panel was, of course, how to improve that political space by using some of the tools available here at the WTO. The last conclusion I would highlight is regarding the importance of high-level political engagement. The panel has certainly given that high-level political weight to these concerns by engaging the Secretary General, two former heads of state, but it has also emphasized the importance of raising these issues to the level of heads of state, emphasizing that trade ministers, health ministers alone certainly cannot resolve these issues, cannot solve the problems. We need to have a real commitment to protecting the right to health at the head of state level. And I really thank the panel for having underscored that message. So please join me in thanking the panelists, the South Center, and the governments of Brazil, Bangladesh, India, and South Africa for organizing this event.